Good morning, Jonathan. How are you?
G'day, mate. I'm well, thanks. Very good.
Like we can tell from the g'day, you're down in Australia, and we're going to get the Aussie input, the Aussie insight as to what's going on in the world of nuclear and uranium. So thanks for joining us. Look, first time on the show. You better tell people who you are and where you're from and what you've done.
Yeah, thanks. Jono Fisher. My friends call me Jono, full name Jonathan. I run a uranium company in WA and have sort of slipped into the role of being the public face of changing the uranium mining ban in WA. But I'm in this role because I have a background across the radiation space. I used to work at Rothschild actually in London, where I was part of the nuclear team there, and we advised on all the big nuclear deals across the world actually. And then my latest claim to fame is I was the one responsible for approving and financing, or getting approved, negotiating with the government and financing Australia's first radioactive waste repository, which is now operational in Western Australia, and an absolutely fantastic facility. So that gives me a bit of a, right from uranium mining through to waste, it gives me quite a broad understanding of the issues across the radiation chain.
Right, and you've got your own company there at the moment. You've just done a small raise. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Cauldron, we're listed on ASX, code CXU. Please follow me on Twitter, CXU ASX. And look, we are drilling out a really big uranium ISR project in WA. So the current ban on uranium mining does mean that our valuation is lower vis-a-vis a company in an open mining jurisdiction. But that's also the beauty. There is an absolute, black swan upside event, massive upside for us when I'm successful at changing that policy. And look, the smart money is, Matt, the policy changes in WA. There's no doubt about it. The question is how long it takes and how long you're going to have to wait for your 10 or 20 times return on our stock. So lots of fun things going on.
Lots of fun things going on. So where is your project based?
So Western Australia, about 100 k's southeast of Oslo, which is it's in the middle of WA.
Right. Okay. Well, look, people should go have a look at that. Definitely go have a look at your Twitter. You're quite outspoken and call it like it is, which I guess is a big part of the appeal. Whatever your view, at least you're talking about it. Right. Let's start with Australia proper, so people can understand what's going on. I think famously, Australian politicians are, I'm going to go anti-nuclear as a phrase. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is an interesting history. We obviously do have in Australia a nuclear reactor. So we have one. It's called Lucas Heights. It's the Opal Australian light water reactor. And famously, a backroom deal was done at the time that was approved to enable us to have this world-leading research reactor, but at the same time kill off the future nuclear civilian reactor industry. And so that happened in 1998. So since then, Australia is now a world producer of nuclear medicine. So, we supply nuclear medicine across the globe. Some of the world's best research breakthroughs in prostate cancer, for example, subject particularly close to my heart, given it's runs rampant in my family. That comes from ANSTO, comes from Australia. And what happens is our politicians like to champion that, but don't like to admit that it's nuclear. And so, we're in the midst of a bit of a renaissance, and there's our national conscience there's a little bit of an argument going on at the moment. So it's going to be very interesting 6 months to see where that ends up.
Right. Well, I think obviously Australia, fantastic miners. Most states have some mining of to some degree or other. You've also got a fair whack of uranium. Most people understand, the kind of contribution from Olympic Dam, etc. But state by state, it's a Labour Party. Can you kind of run us through what's the chances of anything changing for companies with assets in any of those states being able to actually produce uranium, because that's the name of the game? Absolutely.
So South Australia is the only state in Australia at the moment where you can produce uranium, and that has 3 operational mines. So there's Olympic Dam, as you mentioned. There's the Beverley 4 Mile, owned by General Atomics, and Boss Energy has just restarted the Honeymoon project. So that's Australia's core production right there. The Northern Territory, which is not technically a state, let's just call it another jurisdiction, home to the former Ranger uranium mine, that has finished production, and quite controversially, about 3 weeks ago, the Prime Minister of Australia banned any further production from the adjacent Jabiluka deposit. So that was a captain's call he's made, and a very controversial decision. The government of the Northern Territory, actually, there was an election 2 weeks ago, and the Labor Party was thrown out in a landslide loss. So very interesting there. Queensland is the next cab off the ranks in terms of the election. Queensland has an election in October. They currently have a uranium mining ban. They will, all the forward polling there is they're going to get killed. Labor will lose that Queensland election, and so therefore the opportunity for a change in policy out of Queensland improves. The Liberal National Party, who will be in power in Queensland, are not super openly pro-uranium though, so I wouldn't say that a change in policy just because of a change in government is a foregone conclusion, but there are some great assets in Queensland, a little bit underexplored. And then that brings me to Western Australia, my heart and soul, born and bred in WA. World's best mining jurisdiction, frankly. When WA decides to mine, we're really bloody good at it. Right now, there is a uranium mining ban in place. I'll just argue, it's only been in place for 7 years. You used to be able to mine it, but the current government decided to ban it. There is polling there that shows this ban is unpopular, and we expect that over time that ban will be lifted and free up a huge amount more uranium to be exported to the market. So the WA election is in March 2025. Open question there. Probably the Labor government will be returned, actually, but it will be a new Labor government, and I'm very active in campaigning, notwithstanding it be a Labor government, to change that policy.
Right. Well, okay. Talking of which, okay, Chris Bowen, who we've been following for the last 3 or 4 years now, right, and ours. That's called sarcasm for those listening in North America. He's just come up with some nice stats. He said that, and this could be a problem for if you're pro-nuclear, because he says there's been a 17% drop in energy prices, so we don't really need nuclear, do we?
Yeah, so and it sounds like you might be subscribed to Energy Minister's tweets. Energy Minister tweets like he's on steroids, man. He came out saying 17% drop, the largest drop in Australian history in energy prices, actually, and referenced a release by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I'm on record. I went out on Twitter today and literally called him a muppet, which has gained a huge amount of likes, actually. Because the second line of the release said, yes, it's gone down by 17%, but only because the government handed out 18% of government rebates. So without the rebates, the price would go up. Now Chris's specific words were, this drop in pricing proves that our reliable renewables strategy is successful at reducing costs. Now, I don't know, Chris apparently has a Bachelor of Economics. I don't know how he thinks that the concept of renewable energy is expensive, so we have to give out rebates to make the prices go down. Hey, that means the power is cheap. It just doesn't cut the mustard. And he's if you look at government ministers who are the most controversial, or perhaps the ones with the lowest approval rating, he's right up there. So it's going to be a very interesting election cycle.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like it's going to be fun times in Australia, but as you say, that there isn't necessarily an immediate knock-on in terms of change of policy, and the timeframes are really important part of this thing. Uranium investors, which is pretty much the premise of this show, want to see how that impacts Australia's ability to actually add to the production side of the equation, and it doesn't feel like that's going to happen anytime soon.
Well, no. Okay, so the federal polling at the moment is basically dead heat. The current government, which is Bowen and Albanese, Mr. Albanese, the Prime Minister, look like they will lose their majority at the very least, and may well go into minority government. Now, the minority government is likely to be with the Greens, and honestly, God help us. I don't know what could be worse. But the momentum is going towards, going away from them, and it's not out of the realms of possibility that Mr. Dutton does get into power. Now, even if he gets into power, his nuclear strategy is years off. There's a lot of work to do on that, and he would have to get control of the upper house of parliament, which would probably mean he'd have to get a double dissolution election, and it'd get quite messy. But what he could do relatively quickly is make baby steps towards other things within the nuclear value chain, starting off with uranium mining, starting off with participation in the Sapporo 5 initiative to get anti-Russia, anti-China, nuclear supply chains happening. He can influence other state governments to encourage uranium mining. He could put uranium on Australia's critical minerals list, which would open up all sorts of government funding for new uranium projects. So there's plenty he can do, and funnily enough, in uranium before delivering on Australia's first domestic nuclear reactor.
Right. Well, I'm sort of intrigued by Australia's potential, but obviously being hampered by the will, as it were. And it could be a very important contributor towards the supply side of the equation, right? We in the West, we're seeing this kind of potential bifurcation of the market as Kazakhstan production heads east. China, Russia out there, building nuclear reactors for other countries. The enriched uranium coming out of Russia. They kind of solve for themselves and kind of creating a little kind of cabal for themselves. The West is trying to play catch up, but where it's going to really struggle is production, because uranium out of Canada is going to be held up by licensing issues for some time. Where's it all going to come from? Australia should be a big contributor towards that, but it doesn't want to take part in conversations. I look to things like Sapporo 5. Australia should be surely part of that conversation. Doesn't seem like it wants to be.
Yeah, and look, that particular issue, you're very well informed, Matt. That particular issue was raised in a Senate estimates hearing actually a few weeks ago by the opposition. And it's quite an embarrassing piece of video. I have tweeted it. You can find it, where some Conservative senators asked that question of the Federal Resources Ministry, and it's kind of like, you see this video, it's like a hospital pass. Everyone else looking at everyone else, going, "Oh God, how do we answer that?" And that is driven because we have at the head of the government at the moment in Mr. Albanese and in energy policy, Mr. Bowen, we have ideologically opposed people to the industry. Our Prime Minister, Mr. Albanese, literally campaigned against building Australia's world-class research reactor. He campaigned against us being the leader in nuclear medicine and saving literally thousands of people's lives. He didn't want it. And so, our government is dressing up energy policy in economics. They say, we've got to go down a mass renewables route because it's cheaper. Because they don't want to admit that it is actually an ideological issue for them, and they don't want to admit that because, like, Australians, we're a funny bunch. Kind of don't like religion getting in the way of politics. We kind of don't like ideology either. It just does not sell well to the electorate. So they dress it up as economics because we're all rational people. But that's something that is now coming to a head, and I've got absolutely no doubt that the uranium bans that are holding back production in Australia, so mainly the ones in Queensland and WA, they absolutely change. There are very few people that are in positions of power that are opposed. It's a very interesting situation, and in this forum I probably won't go into the details, specific names and politics, but it can happen. And when it does happen, when Australia decides to mine, as I said, we're really good at it. We do have, just like Canada, that we do have native title considerations, but they're not insurmountable. And we build mining projects in this country better than anyone in the world. So I think Australia is. Will we ever get to be bigger than Kazakhstan? I don't know, but I'm sure we can be number two.
I'm not sure everyone out there is on board with what you're saying, because if I look at what's happening with some of the big names in the space, the deep yellows, the paladins, the bosses of this world, seems to be a little bit of shorting going on. If I want to say a little bit, a lot of shorting. So what do they know that you don't know?
Yeah, well, number one, all those majors and their assets actually are largely, other than bosses, their operational assets on which the basis on which they are being shorted are African. They're not within Australia. We look at, and we were doing this analysis on ASX the other day. I mean, I think there's a few things to point out. The first is WA has uranium mining ban, and we are massively pro-mining generally. Of the top 25 companies in WA that are, so their home bourse, if you will, on the ASX is the WA branch, of the top 25, 3 are uranium companies. Now, that's notwithstanding the fact that the jurisdiction itself has a ban in place. So it just proves that there is absolutely capability, competence, and desire in WA. We could be doing so much more. When you look at those specific shorts, I think the interest in Boss is now over 11%. You've got Paladin sitting at about 9 or more from memory. Maybe Deep Yellow's 9 and Paladin is even higher. We started with Boss. Look, commissioning an ISR project is probably one of the more difficult things you will ever do in your life to get nameplate production. So we wish Duncan and the team at Boss well. But there seems to be someone very intent, or as you say, have some inside knowledge on how they're going with that production ramp up. I actually a top shareholder in my company is also a very large shareholder in Boss. It seems that there's someone there that is that's got enormous balls, frankly, and are pushing down that price. And I will party like it's 1999 when those shorts are wide. I really will. As a developer, it's a very frustrating scenario, the short situation. And look, Paladin is well valued. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is. It now needs to kind of prove itself. Not necessarily backfill, but certainly prove itself by getting up and running. And obviously, the deal they did with Encore was a sort of part of an expansion policy, and perhaps people got a little bit confused with that. Why they did that, but that's for the company to help us understand better. With regards to some of the other companies operating in Africa, we're just going to stick with Africa for a bit there. Obviously, we've seen a little bit of a issue in Niger with the coup there. Things seem to have settled down there, but it did kind of throw a spanner in the works in terms of the kind of this part of this momentum. Some people read it as well, that's going to be even less supply in the market, so therefore that's good news for uranium price. But at the same time, it kind of made people realize the delicate nature of the uranium and the geopolitical nature of uranium production globally. Namibia, obviously, I guess famously, seems to be pretty solid place to do business. US, we've looked at, some of the production levels being talked about there by US. It's not a whole bunch of production, $250,000, £500,000 here and there. It kind of feels like this is building. This coil spring people like to refer to it as this kind of huge supply deficit moving into what seems to be a massive demand cycle that we're gonna hit. How do uranium company CEOs play into that? When you go into these rooms with investors and say, "Hey, we're a pretty good bet." How do you frame that? What do people believe? What do they not believe?
Well, so from the Aussie perspective, and bear in mind that Australians have grown up in, as you mentioned, an anti-nuclear sort of environment where the only information they got on the nuclear industry is from The Simpsons. The question of whether we build reactors in this country is open, but the message getting out there that we might not build them, but the rest of the world kind of is because they need to get hit net zero, that is hitting home. And so the need for uranium, number one, and number two, how we can be a good corporate citizen by selling uranium to the world. So Australians get a bit of a bad rap because we export so much coal, gas, and dirty iron ore that, has massive Scope 3 emissions associated with it. How do we get some of that moral high ground back? Well, why don't we export the world's most concentrated form of green energy? Let's not worry about green hydrogen, which our government seems fascinated on. We currently export about 5,000 tonnes of U out of South Australia. And roughly, depending on how you do the calculations on the substitution for say, coal, the calculations are this equivalent to offsetting that 200 million tonnes of carbon. And so my pitch to investors is, let us export a bit more coal, and Australia kind of hits net zero on one metric of how you calculate it. And that whole importance of net zero, while, you've had some jurisdictions in Europe who are frankly 20 years ahead of Australia on all this, starting to pull back and go, geez, net zero is hard, or we're swapping out renewables targets for emissions-free targets and all sorts of stuff. Australia's not there yet. And so, this net zero is very, very important and at the forefront of people's and investors' minds. And so my message is to them is this: uranium is the most efficient way that we can help people reach that, and people will be willing to pay us a lot of money for it.
Right.
So, very, very strong future on, long-term elevated uranium price and our ability to supply into that market.
So I guess the pitch is based on fundamentals. I mean, where do you sit on this? Because I think the thing, when we've been looking at this space for the last 5 years, and we're heavily invested in it, so we believe the thematic. But what we've noticed the whole way along is each month there seems to be a new catalyst. There seems to be some one event which is going to change the fortunes of all uranium investors. And I think the most recent thing being AI data centers, right?
And the Microsoft team idea. Yep, absolutely.
There you go, right? It's nice having these big names in with multi-billion-dollar budgets, etc. But even they aren't going to, I think, necessarily overpay for something. But it's nice that they're kind of getting in on it. Where do you sit on these kind of massive catalyst moments that the market does like to pump every now and again?
Yeah, I must admit the space on the what we call UTwit, uranium Twitter, is full of guys, absolutely championing the next catalyst. Now, I have a bit of a background. I used to sell iron ore in China as well, right? And so I used to pore over the iron ore demand and supply models. And, what I will say, and, referencing it back to the uranium and nuclear industry is, look, the demand growth profile for nuclear is there. The fundamental case for nuclear is there. Fantastic. But I've never heard of a nuclear plant got been ahead of time. They will take longer, and that demand growth, however strong the triple nuclear pledge is, are we going to see the upside? Are we going to see that really upside case? I don't think we will. But we're going to go ahead. Fantastic. But what people don't realise is that however long a nuclear plant takes to build, I guarantee you a uranium mine takes longer. And that's maybe counterintuitive for people. They don't understand that. But when you go through the process of initial discovery, drilling it out, proving a resource, then getting your community approvals and many years of environmental baseline monitoring, all through that to then build the project and get in production, absolutely, that takes longer than the actual plant itself, the power plant itself. So while the demand line may lag, supply will lag longer. Hence supporting the continued strong case for uranium. That's my view.
Right. Well, I think it's definitely interesting times out there. And you guys, obviously, you can't not be aware of, and we've kind of outlined the Aussie position here, because I think most people don't get to kind of have a look in or get a, not necessarily unbiased, but so clearer view of what's happening there politically, how that affects the Aussie uranium companies. But there's a lot going on else out there out there in the world. You know, the Kazakhstan situation with Russia, with China. We've kind of got the Russian-Ukraine situation, obviously, cause for concern indeed on multiple fronts. Canada, with its kind of, I guess, long lead times, as you say, it's the average mine construction period without the nuclear factor, without the radioactive factor, up to 18 years there from discovery to build. As you say, long time coming, and the US kind of, I guess, restarts on a lot of the kind of, you know, smaller mines, which the US used to be famous for. I mean, when you're looking at the market in terms of supply into that kind of that thematic, I mean, is there any cause for concern or hope, or how do you look at it?
So what I would say, and you know, I know people discount Western Australia as a supply source because there is a current ban, although, as I say, that ban hasn't been there for that long. Take that aside for a moment. Western Australia's mining legislation is held up as a model around the world. In fact, the West Australian Mines Department just helped Kazakhstan implement its new mining code. It's based on the WA laws. You can get mining projects up in WA actually relatively quickly from discovery through. Radiation obviously overlays on top of that, and there is a little bit of an extra process. But once we remove the uranium mining ban, WA can move quicker than onshore US or Canada through these processes, because, you know, we do have a very, very well put together mining set of legislation which can handle uranium, right? It's just right now it doesn't. And this is really interesting for people. You must understand, there is no mining legislative ban in WA. There is a policy ban of the current Labor Party. That policy ban could literally be reversed by the mining minister penning a one paragraph memo to the CEO of the Mines Department. No legislative requirement at all. So when things start to change, it can happen quickly. And I think you can see, as WA has led the world in lithium and iron ore and gold, until recently we were good at nickel, you know, you can see that same growth coming through in uranium. So, you know, I think rosy future for us, and everyone should keep an eye out of what's going on politically, because from politically to value for investors is a short hop, skip, and a jump.
Well, look, and my next question really is around spot price. I think most uranium investors look to spot price as an indicator of potential margin. There's a lot more complicated than that, obviously. And maybe therein a sanity lies if you're trying to guess when price will move. But what do you think is going to drive this truly, if it's not going to be one-off catalyst events which come and go?
So what are we at now? We've seen just recently, obviously coming down. You know, actually the price sort of has leveled on 80. Roughly. And what you saw over the last couple of days, man, it's really interesting. Last couple of days, spot went up like $1 a day for 2 days, depending on which metric and which price tracking. The impact of that small change on sentiment for the junior uranium sector is hilarious. They live and die by it. Whereas, as you say, anyone that's close to production, they care obviously much more about the published term price. I'm hearing exciting things about what this month's term price will print at. You've probably got better insight than I do. But, you know, I think people do also need to understand there that you hear about annual contracting prices for utilities, right? It's kind of bullshit. They've all got multi-year inventories that they can flex if they need to, if they've got a bet on the market, and, you know, there's risk in that, but that's absolutely what they can do. So they can hold off for as long as they can probably hold off for longer than people expect, but eventually they'll have to move. But it's not as if they are absolutely bleeding for inventory right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think in the US we're talking about down to about 2 years left of inventory. Europe about the same.
And so people have been saying, "Oh, hang on, it was September this year. It had to happen by September." I'm like, there's quarters and periods of time that's getting more likely. Yes, but it's not. It didn't have to happen in a week. It's not like the cherry blossom season in Japan where, boom, 3 days and you're done.
Yeah, well, unless you're at the WNA, I think it really was a case of 3 days and you're done. People were pretty excited about what was going to happen there, and yet again, it came and went. I kind of feel the nuclear industry knows more about this than the market, and it's enthusiastic and bullish as the market wants to be. It's got to be based on fundamentals. It's got to be based on the kind of key drivers. And as I've always said, trying to second guess utilities, buying behavior, it's like playing chess and only being able to see your side of the board. So good luck, folks. But look, general consensus is it's moving into a very positive, fantastic phase. Let's not forget we're up, crikey, nearly 300%. Over the last 3 years in terms of spot price, if that's what you want to use as an indicator. Term contracting still happening, so lots to like, lots of upside to be had yet. So Jono, we'll call you Jono. Now we've been introduced to you. Really appreciate your insight. Everyone, go and look at Jonathan's Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
At CXUASX.
Well, there you go. CXUASX. Jonathan, appreciate your time. We'll see you soon.
Awesome, mate. Look forward to it.